The grand ballroom glittered like a dream, chandeliers spilling light over polished marble floors, the air perfumed with roses and champagne. It was the kind of night Elena Rossi used to imagine as a fairy tale, where couples danced beneath crystal light and love was celebrated with laughter and music. But tonight, her dream turned into a public nightmare. All eyes followed Adrian Rossi, her husband, as he strode confidently to the stage. His tuxedo gleamed under the spotlight, his arm linked with a woman who was not his wife. She was younger, daringly dressed in a crimson gown that clung to her curves. The room buzzed with whispers. Who was she? And why was Adrian smiling with such pride, as if showing off a prize? Elena, 6 months pregnant, walked in just as Adrian introduced the woman. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang out, smooth and arrogant, "meet Sabrina Cole, the woman who makes my world brighter." The crowd gasped. Some guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Others leaned closer, eager for gossip. Cameras flashed, and in the middle of it all stood Elena, one hand cradling her belly, the other gripping her clutch so tightly her knuckles turned white. She hadn't expected this. She thought she was arriving to support her husband at an important gala. She had even spent hours getting ready. Her pale blue maternity gown carefully chosen, her hair pinned with delicate pearls, her heart hopeful that Adrian might finally notice her again. Instead, he erased her existence in a single sentence. Sabrina's eyes locked on Elena across the ballroom. A sly smile curved her lips, a smile meant to wound. She leaned into Adrian's shoulder, whispering something that made him laugh out loud. That laugh, once reserved for Elena in their early days of love, now cut through her like a blade. Elena's legs trembled as she took a step forward, her heels clicking against the marble. The murmurs around her grew louder. "Isn't that his wife? She's pregnant. How cruel." The pity in their voices stung worse than their judgment. Adrian's face tightened when he noticed her. For a fleeting moment, guilt flashed in his eyes, but pride quickly smothered it. He didn't move toward her. He didn't call her name. He simply tightened his grip on Sabrina's waist, daring Elena to make a scene. Her throat burned. She wanted to scream, to demand how he could humiliate her like this while their child grew inside her. But the words died, drowned by the shame pressing against her chest. She felt small, invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of her own marriage. Still, Elena forced herself to stand tall. Her voice cracked, but carried enough strength to cut through the whispers. "Adrian," she said, "how could you?" The room froze. 100 eyes shifted between them. For the first time, Adrian's polished mask slipped. His lips curled, not with love, but with annoyance. "You shouldn't be here, Elena," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Go home. You're embarrassing yourself." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elena's vision blurred with tears, her heart breaking with every word. She turned away before anyone could see her crumble completely. As she walked out of the ballroom, the laughter behind her sounded like thunder. Outside, the cold night air hit her lungs like knives. Rain began to fall, soaking her gown, clinging to her body. She wrapped her arms around her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "I'm sorry, my love. I thought he would protect us." But little did she know, her story was only beginning. Because in that moment of despair, she was about to send a message to the wrong man, a man feared and respected, a mafia billionaire who would change her life forever. And when his black car pulled up minutes later, Elena's nightmare turned into something far more dangerous. Rain poured harder as Elena stumbled down the empty street, her gown heavy with water, her makeup streaked across her cheeks. The cold stung her skin, but nothing compared to the sting inside her chest. Every step echoed with Adrian's cruel words, "Go home. You're embarrassing yourself." She couldn't go home. That house wasn't home anymore. It was a cage filled with memories of laughter that had rotted into betrayal. She reached a quiet park bench beneath a flickering streetlight, lowered herself onto it, and wrapped her trembling arms around her belly. "Don't worry, little one," she whispered through broken sobs. "You still have me." Her phone buzzed in her clutch. She pulled it out, the screen glowing against the darkness. Messages, dozens of them. Some from gossip sites already circulating the scandal at the gala. Some from so-called friends pretending to care while secretly savoring the drama. Her hands shook as she scrolled, her heart pounding. Elena opened her contacts, searching for the only person she thought might listen, her best friend Julia. Julia always answered, always comforted her, always said the words that kept her going. With tears blinding her, Alina typed, "Please? I can't do this anymore. He humiliated me in front of everyone. I'm pregnant and alone. I don't know what to do. Please come." Her thumb hit send. The message whooshed away. Relief swept over her as she waited for Julia's reply. But seconds stretched into minutes, and the screen stayed dark. She tried calling, straight to voicemail. Panic rose in her throat. "Julia, where are you? I need you," she cried, but only the storm answered. Unaware, Elena had made a mistake. In her haze of tears, her finger had slipped. She hadn't messaged Julia. The text had gone to a different contact, one she didn't even remember saving, a number with no name, just a single initial, M. Her phone buzzed. A reply lit up the screen. "Where are you?" Elena froze. It wasn't Julia. The words were short, cold, but powerful. Her first instinct was fear. Who was this? But desperation outweighed caution. Her fingers moved on their own. 7th and Maple. Please hurry. She pressed send before she could stop herself. For a moment there was silence. Then another message arrived. "Stay where you are." Her breath caught. She looked around the deserted street, shivering as thunder rolled overhead. Every rational thought told her to delete the messages, to run home, to lock the doors. But her heart, raw and bleeding, told her she had nothing left to lose. Memories flooded back. Adrian's smile when they first met, his promises whispered late at night, the vows they exchanged under 1,000 lights. She had given up her dreams for him, traded her independence for a love she thought was unbreakable. And tonight, he shattered it before the world. Elena closed her eyes, rocking gently as the rain fell harder. Her body ached with exhaustion, her mind with grief. She whispered again to her unborn child, "I'll find a way. I don't know how, but I will." Headlights suddenly cut through the downpour. A sleek black car rolled slowly to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the streetlight's weak glow. The engine purred with quiet menace, like a predator circling its prey. Elena's heart thudded painfully. She gripped her clutch, unsure whether to stand or run. The back door opened with a soft click. A tall figure stepped out, umbrella in hand, moving with controlled power. Even from a distance, his presence swallowed the street. "Elena Rossi?" The man's voice was deep, steady, and chilling. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The stranger extended the umbrella, shielding her from the storm. His dark eyes locked onto hers. In them she saw danger, but also something else. Recognition, as if he already knew her pain. "I believe he sent me a message," he said. And in that moment, Elena realized her desperate mistake had summoned a man far more dangerous than her husband could ever be. The storm raged on, lightning flashing across the night sky, but the man before Elena stood untouched, calm as if the chaos bent around him. His umbrella shielded her, his gaze piercing through the rain with an intensity that made her chest tighten. I didn't mean," Elena stammered, her voice trembling. "Yet you called," the stranger interrupted, his tone low, smooth, but carrying the kind of weight that silenced her protests. "And I came." He tilted his head, studying her soaked gown, her trembling hands resting protectively on her belly. For the briefest moment, something flickered in his eyes. Pity? No, it wasn't pity. It was recognition. He gestured to the waiting car. "Get in, you shouldn't be out here." Elena's instincts screamed danger. Everything about him was wrong, too powerful, too dangerous, too unknown. But the thought of returning home, alone, broken, was worse. Her body shook from cold, from fear, from heartbreak. Slowly she nodded. He guided her into the car with surprising gentleness. The leather seats were warm, the air filled with the faint scent of expensive cologne and cigar smoke. She clutched her clutch like a lifeline, eyes darting nervously. The man slid in beside her, closing the door with a soft thud. The world outside disappeared, replaced by the cocoon of shadows within the vehicle. The driver pulled away without a word. "Who are you?" Elena finally whispered. He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Marco De Luca." Her heart skipped. She had heard the name whispered in the city's darker corners. A billionaire investor with ties too tangled to trace, a man who controlled empires both legal and otherwise. Some called him a savior, others a devil. But all agreed on one thing. You did not cross Marco De Luca. I didn't mean to bother you," she stammered. "It was a mistake. I meant to text my friend." "Maybe," Marco said quietly, his gaze fixed on her. "Or maybe fate has a strange sense of humor." Elena turned her face toward the rain-streaked window, trying to calm her racing heart. She shouldn't be here. She shouldn't trust him. But the warmth of the car, the steadiness of his voice, wrapped around her like a shield. For the first time that night, she didn't feel entirely alone. Marco broke the silence. "Your husband, Adrian Rossi." Her head snapped toward him. "You know him?" Marco's lips curved, not in a smile but in something colder. "I know of him. Men like him are predictable. Ambition without loyalty, power without discipline. Dangerous, but sloppy." Elena's stomach twisted. "You don't understand. He humiliated me tonight, in front of everyone, and I'm carrying his child." Her voice cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. She hated herself for breaking down in front of a stranger, but she couldn't stop. "I thought he loved me. I gave him everything, and he threw me away like nothing." For a long moment, Marco said nothing. His eyes softened almost imperceptibly as he studied the broken woman beside him. Finally, he spoke. "Then you're not nothing. You're stronger than you think. He betrayed you, not the other way around." The words hit her harder than she expected. No one had said that to her. Not her friends, not her family, not even herself. For a moment, hope flickered in the ashes of her despair. The car slowed. Through the tinted windows, Elena saw tall iron gates opening to reveal a sprawling estate, its lights glowing against the storm. She turned to Marco, panic rising. "Where are we going?" "My home," he answered simply. "You need rest, safety, and answers." Her pulse quickened. She wanted to protest, to demand he let her go. But something in his voice, in the unshakable certainty of his presence, silenced her. The gates closed behind them, locking her fate inside. And Elena realized she had stepped out of one world of betrayal and into another, far more dangerous world ruled by Marco De Luca. The storm had cleared by morning, but inside Adrian Rossi's penthouse the air was heavy with fury. He paced across the marble floor, his jaw clenched, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. Every media outlet in the city had picked up the scandal from the gala. His name was everywhere, headlines blaring not about his success, but about the humiliation of his pregnant wife walking in on him and Sabrina. "This is a disaster," he snapped into the phone. "I told you to control the press." On the other end, his publicist stammered excuses, but Adrian ended the call before they could finish. He hurled the phone onto the sofa, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. For a man who built his empire on image, this wasn't just bad press, it was war. Sabrina, draped lazily across the chaise in a silk robe, sipped champagne as if nothing had happened. "Relax, darling," she purred. "The world loves a scandal. Give it a week, and everyone will forget." Adrian turned on her, his eyes sharp. "Forget? Do you understand what's at stake? Investors are already calling. My board is questioning my judgment, and now Elena." His voice cracked with frustration. "She's ruining everything." Sabrina set her glass down with deliberate care, rising to meet him. She traced a manicured finger along his chest, her smile venomous. "Then ruin her first." Adrian stiffened. "What are you suggesting?" "That pathetic wife of yours is still carrying your name, your child. People pity her." Sabrina's voice dripped with contempt. "Turn that pity into scorn. Make her look unstable, weak. If she's the crazy wife who can't handle reality, no one will side with her." Adrian hesitated. For all his arrogance, a part of him still flinched at the thought of destroying Elena publicly. But the fire in Sabrina's eyes burned away his doubt. He had chosen her, hadn't he? There was no turning back. "How?" he asked finally. Sabrina's smile widened. "Leave that to me." She crossed the room to her purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. "Elena is vulnerable right now, alone, emotional. All it takes is the right push. We leak stories about her, claims she's unstable, unfit to be a mother, a little whisper about her mental health, a suggestion she's seeing another man." Adrian frowned. "No one will believe that." "Oh, they will," Sabrina said sweetly, "especially when we give them proof." Adrian's heart skipped. "What proof?" Sabrina's eyes glinted. "The man who picked her up last night." Adrian froze. "What are you talking about?" "I have friends everywhere, Adrian," she whispered, leaning close. "Elena wasn't alone. Someone powerful collected her from the streets after the gala. I don't know who he is yet, but I'll find out. And when I do, we'll make it look like she's been unfaithful all along. The poor little wife, running into another man's arms. The headlines will eat it up." Adrian's stomach twisted. Jealousy, hot and bitter, coursed through his veins. Elena, his Elena, with another man? The thought made his vision blur. Find him, he growled, and when you do, destroy them both. Sabrina kissed him lightly on the cheek, her voice a whisper of poison. Already ahead of you. As Adrian returned to the window, staring out at the glittering city skyline, he clenched his fists. He thought he had buried Elena under humiliation. But if she had found strength somewhere else, he would crush it, no matter the cost. What Adrian didn't know was that the man who stood beside Elena now was far more dangerous than he could ever imagine, and the Shadow War had already begun. The DeLuca estate stretched across acres of manicured gardens and towering stone walls. Elena sat in a velvet armchair inside the grand library, her damp hair now dry, her gown replaced with one of the soft robes provided by the house staff. Yet despite the warmth of the crackling fire before her, she shivered. It wasn't just the storm that clung to her bones, it was the presence of the man sitting across from her. Marco DeLuca. He poured a glass of amber whiskey, the crystal catching the firelight. His movements were deliberate, controlled, as though every gesture was a performance of power. Finally, he leaned back, his gaze fixed on her. "You should eat," he said, nodding to the untouched tray of food at her side. Elena shook her head. "I can't." Her voice was quiet, raw from crying. "I don't even know why I'm here. I don't know you." Marco studied her for a long moment, then set his glass down. "You don't need to know me, Mrs. Rossi, but you need to know the man you married." Her heart skipped. "Adrian?" Marco's expression darkened. "Adrian Rossi is not the man you think he is. Or maybe," he added, "he is exactly the man you fear he is." Elena's stomach nodded. "What are you talking about?" Marco reached for a leather folder resting on the side table. As he slid it toward her, the sound of paper against wood echoing louder than thunder. "Read." With hesitant fingers, Elena opened the folder. Inside were documents, photographs, bank records, evidence laid out in brutal clarity. She scanned the first page, her breath catching. Offshore accounts, transfers to shell companies, payments under false names. This isn't real," she whispered, her hands trembling. "It's very real," Marco said, his voice flat. "Your husband has been laundering money through international deals. He's stolen from investors, betrayed partners, and lied to everyone, including you." Elena shook her head, tears welling. "No, Adrian might be selfish, arrogant, but he's not a criminal." Marco leaned forward, his eyes hard. "Do you think I deal in rumors? If Adrian Rossi were a small-time liar, I wouldn't bother. But he's more dangerous than that. He dipped into territories he doesn't understand. He tried to cheat men you don't cheat." Her pulse quickened. "Men like you?" Marco didn't flinch. "Yes." The word fell heavy between them. Elena closed the folder, her hands trembling. "Why are you showing me this? Why me?" "Because," Marco said slowly, "you need to understand the storm coming your way. Adrian thinks humiliation is enough to break you, but he's tangled himself in something bigger, something that will destroy him, and if you're not careful, it will destroy you too." Her throat tightened. She thought back to the gala, to Adrian's proud smile with Sabrina on his arm. The betrayal already burned deep, but now, knowing he had lied about everything else, the wound widened into something unbearable. "I don't," her voice broke. "I don't know what to do." For the first time, Marco's gaze softened. He reached across the table, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the weight of his presence. "You survive. For yourself. For your child. And you let me handle Adrian." The fire cracked louder, filling the silence. Elena lowered her head, tears dripping onto her hands. She wanted to scream, to rage, to collapse. But deep down, she knew Marco was right. Adrian wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a man building his empire on lies. And those lies were about to burn. Elena didn't yet realize that by accepting Marco's protection, she was stepping into a battle where loyalty meant survival, and betrayal meant blood. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of Marco DeLuca's estate, catching on the polished marble floors and gilded chandeliers. Elena stood hesitantly at the threshold of the grand hallway, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She had barely slept. Images of Adrian's betrayal, the documents Marco had shown her, and the storm outside all twisted together into restless dreams. Now she found herself here, inside the home of a man whispered about in fear. "Mrs. Rossi," a soft voice called. It was an older woman, dressed in black, with a kind smile that contrasted the severity of the mansion. Mr. DeLuca asked me to show you around. Breakfast is waiting in the conservatory. Elena nodded nervously, following. The corridors seemed endless, lined with oil paintings of men in dark suits, stern eyes staring out from another era. Family portraits, she realized, but not the warm kind. These were legacies, warnings carved into canvas. When they reached the conservatory, sunlight bathed the glass walls, illuminating a table covered with silver platters. Fresh fruit, pastries, eggs, and more food than she could eat in a week. Elena sat awkwardly, her stomach churning more from nerves than hunger. Moments later, Marco entered. His presence filled the room instantly, his tailored suit immaculate, his eyes sharp. He didn't smile. He rarely did. "You should eat," he said, the same words as the night before. This time, Elena forced herself to pick up a fork. "I don't understand why you're doing this. Why keep me here?" Marco poured himself coffee, then sat across from her. "Because you don't understand the world your husband walked into. And if you stay blind, you'll end up collateral damage." Elena's chest tightened. "You mean your world?" "Yes." Marco didn't hesitate. "My world." After breakfast, he motioned for her to follow. They stepped out onto a balcony overlooking the sprawling estate. Guards patrolled discreetly along the walls, earpieces in, their eyes scanning the grounds. Below, luxury cars lined the driveway, each one gleaming like weapons polished for war. "This is my empire," Marco said. "Part of it, at least. Hotels, shipping lines, casinos. On paper, all legitimate. But the real power lies in what people don't see." Elena hugged her arms around herself. "And Adrian, he got involved with this?" Marco's expression hardened. He thought he could play both sides, profit from my world while keeping his hands clean. Men like him think rules don't apply to them. But there are rules here. Rules written in blood. The words made Elena shiver. She looked away, but Marco's voice pulled her back. "You wanted to believe your marriage was safe, that your child's father was just ambitious. But ambition without loyalty is poison. He betrayed you, and now he's trying to paint you as unstable. He wants to erase you." Elena's throat burned. She had tried to hold on to some shred of the man she once loved, but Marco's words tore down the last pieces. "So what happens now?" she whispered. Marco studied her carefully. "That depends on you. You can walk away, pretend none of this exists, but Adrian will come for you. He won't let you stand in the way of his image. Or," his voice lowered, steady and commanding, "you can stand with me, and I'll make sure he never hurts you again." Her breath caught. The idea of siding with a man like Marco terrified her. Yet for the first time she felt the possibility of safety, of strength. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the sky above was clear. It felt like a warning, or perhaps a promise. Elena didn't answer yet, but in her silence a choice was forming, one that would bind her fate to Marco's empire, whether she was ready or not. The city was alive with morning traffic as Marco's sleek black car pulled up in front of the private clinic. Elena sat stiffly in the back seat, her hands folded protectively over her belly. Her heart raced with every bump in the road. Doctor visits had always been something she did alone. Adrian never came, too busy, too important. Now, the man beside her wasn't her husband but Marco DeLuca, a stranger whose presence carried both safety and danger in equal measure. "You don't have to come in," Elena murmured as the driver opened the door. Marco's gaze shifted to her, sharp but unreadable. "I do. A man who leaves his pregnant wife alone in moments like these is a coward. I'm not him." His words struck her harder than she expected. She didn't argue. Together, they stepped inside. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, a mixture meant to calm anxious mothers. Elena signed in at the desk, feeling the receptionist's curious gaze flicker between her and Marco. Whispers trailed behind them as they entered the waiting area. Couples sat side by side, hands intertwined, glowing with expectation. Elena felt the sting of comparison. She wasn't glowing. She was cracked porcelain, holding together only for the child within her. Marco sat silently beside her, his phone in hand but untouched. Instead, his eyes studied her profile. The tightness in her jaw, the way her fingers twisted the edge of her purse strap. She was afraid, but not of him. She was afraid of being alone. When her name was called, Elena rose slowly. Marco stood too, ignoring the nurse's raised eyebrow. He followed her into the examination room. The doctor, a kind woman with silver hair, smiled warmly. "How are we doing today, Elena?" Elena forced a smile. trying to be strong. The doctor helped her onto the table, prepping the ultrasound. As the machine hummed to life, the room filled with a sound that made Elena's breath hitch, the rhythmic thump of a tiny heartbeat. Her eyes flooded instantly. "That's my baby." Marco shifted closer, his gaze fixed on the screen. The black and white image flickered, and there it was, a small, fragile life moving inside her. He had seen power, money, and fear command entire cities, but never something like this, something pure. Elena reached for the doctor's hand. Is everything okay?" The doctor smiled gently. "Healthy heartbeat, strong. Your baby is resilient, Elena, just like you." The words broke her. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as she laughed softly, shakily. She whispered to her belly, "Did you hear that, little one? You're strong." Marco watched, unmoving, yet something shifted inside him. He had seen women cry before, out of fear, desperation, betrayal. But this was different. This was love so raw it carved the air around her. And it unsettled him more than any rival ever could. When the appointment ended, Elena wiped her tears and gathered herself. Marco walked her back to the car, silent until they were inside. "You didn't have to come," she said again, her voice steadier now. "But you did." Marco turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You think strength is silence, Elena, but strength is crying in front of strangers and still walking out with your head high. Don't ever mistake yourself for weak." Her throat tightened. No one, not Adrian, not anyone, had ever told her that. She looked at Marco then, really looked, and for the first time she didn't just see danger. She saw the possibility of something else. The car pulled away, carrying them back toward the world where shadows waited. And though Elena didn't realize it yet, Marco had witnessed something today that would change the way he saw her forever. The penthouse glittered with the illusion of wealth, crystal decanters on the bar, designer gowns hanging in open closets, champagne bottles still half full from the night before. But beneath the shimmer, tension coiled like a snake. Sabrina Cole paced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, her red silk robe flowing behind her like a warning flag. Adrian sat slouched on the couch, nursing a glass of scotch, though it wasn't even noon. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw set in frustration. "They're laughing at me, Sabrina," he muttered. "Every headline, every whisper in the boardroom. I'm a joke because of her." Sabrina rolled her eyes. "Because of Elena? Please, don't blame your wife for your own lack of control. You paraded me in front of everyone. What did you think would happen?" Adrian's glare cut to her, sharp and dangerous. But Sabrina didn't flinch. She never did. Instead, she lit a cigarette, exhaling a thin stream of smoke. "This is why men like you lose. You think humiliation ends the game, but it doesn't. Elena isn't broken yet, and now she has someone behind her." Adrian's hand tightened around his glass. "You mean that man, the one who picked her up?" Sabrina's lips curved into a sly smile. "Yes, Marco De Luca." The name landed like a gunshot. Adrian froze. "De Luca? Are you out of your mind? That means dangerous." Sabrina stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with calculation. "Dangerous? Exactly, and that's why we use him." Adrian laughed bitterly. "You don't use Marco De Luca. He uses you. Everyone knows that." "Not everyone," Sabrina countered smoothly. She perched on the armrest beside him, her perfume a cloud of poison. "He may be powerful, but men like him always have a weakness, and I intend to find it." Adrian studied her suspiciously. "And how do you plan to do that?" Sabrina's smile widened. "By walking away from you." The words hit him harder than he expected. "What?" "I'll make it look real. I'll leave you. I'll cry. I'll beg forgiveness. I'll paint myself as the woman scorned. And then when the moment is right, I'll slip into De Luca's circle. He'll think I'm useful, maybe even loyal. And when I'm close enough, I'll find out everything. His secrets, his weaknesses, the cracks in his empire." Adrian slammed his glass onto the table. "This is insane. You think you can outsmart him? You'll get yourself killed." Sabrina leaned in, her voice a whisper of steel. "No, Adrian, I'll get us both out of this mess. If Elena wants to play protected wife, fine. Let her. While she hides behind De Luca's shadow, I'll crawl inside it, and when the time comes, I'll tear it apart from within." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Adrian stared at her, torn between fear and admiration. She was reckless, yes, but she was also brilliant, manipulative in ways he could never be. And if she succeeded, he exhaled sharply. "Fine, do it, but if you fail, don't come running back to me." Sabrina's smile was pure venom. Darling, if I fail, you won't be here to run back to. She stubbed out her cigarette and sauntered toward the door, her robe trailing like spilled blood. In her mind, the plan was already unfolding. She would find Marco DeLuca. She would charm him, study him, unravel him. What she didn't realize was that Marco had survived far worse than a mistress with a pretty face and sharp tongue. And the closer Sabrina moved toward him, the closer she walked into her own destruction. It started with whispers. At first, Alina thought they were just rumors born from the scandal at the gala. People stared longer when she walked into a boutique, conversations hushed when she entered a cafe. But soon the whispers grew into headlines, and the headlines carried venom. Mrs. Rossi suffers breakdown. Pregnant wife seen in distress, unfit to be a mother? And worst of all, Elena Rossi's secret lover, a dangerous man. Elena gripped the magazine in her hands, her stomach twisting. On the glossy cover was a blurry photo of her outside Marco's estate, bundled in his coat against the storm. The headline turned protection into betrayal, painting her as the unfaithful wife hiding in another man's arms. Her chest tightened. They're trying to destroy me. Across from her in the library, Marco scanned the same magazine, his expression unreadable. They are, he confirmed, and they're using me to do it. Elena's hands shook as she tossed the magazine onto the table. Adrian will stop at nothing. He'll ruin me just to save himself. Marco leaned back, his eyes narrowing. That's what men like him do, but lies only work if you let them. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. How do I fight this? I don't have his money, his power, his influence. I can't even walk down the street without someone looking at me like I'm pathetic. Marco's voice lowered, calm but steady. Then stop fighting on his terms. You don't need to match his power. You need to expose his weakness. But even as Marco spoke, Adrian and Sabrina were orchestrating their smear campaign with ruthless precision. In Adrian's office, the air buzzed with tension as his publicist clicked through slides on a large screen. The narrative is shifting in your favor, Mr. Rossi. The story paints Elena as unstable. The public believes she's fragile, emotional, unfit. Adrian's lips curled into a smirk. Good, keep pushing it. Sabrina, perched elegantly on the edge of his desk, added, make sure the photos of her with DeLuca spread everywhere. If people think she's run into the arms of a mafia billionaire, no one will question why I'm here instead. The publicist nodded. We've already fed it to the tabloids. By next week, she'll be the scandal, not you. Adrian raised his glass in a mock toast. To freedom. Sabrina clinked her glass against his, though her smile hid another agenda. While Adrian celebrated, Sabrina's mind was already racing toward Marco. Every photo of Elena with him was also a map leading Sabrina closer to her goal. Back at the estate, Elena paced the library, her mind unraveling. They'll take my baby, she whispered, panic breaking her voice. If the courts believe I'm unstable, if Adrian convinces them, he could win custody. I can't lose my child, Marco, I can't. For a long moment, Marco said nothing. Then he rose, walked to the window, and spoke without turning. Adrian plays with shadows, lies, rumors. That's his battlefield. Mine is truth and leverage. Elena frowned. What do you mean? Marco turned, his eyes cold, unyielding. You don't beat a man like Adrian by defending yourself. You beat him by making sure the world sees who he really is. Her breath caught. And how do we do that? Marco's lips curved, not in amusement but in resolve. We expose him. Every dirty deal. Every stolen dollar. Every betrayal. And when we're done, he won't have a reputation left to protect. Elena's pulse raced. Fear mingled with something else, hope. For the first time she realized she wasn't powerless, not with Marco beside her. And as Adrian's lies spread through the city like wildfire, Elena made a silent vow. She would not break. She would fight back. And the man who betrayed her would regret ever underestimating her. Night had fallen over the DeLuca estate, the halls quiet, except for the distant ticking of a grandfather clock. Elena sat curled in the corner of the library, her knees drawn close despite the swell of her pregnancy. The fire in the hearth had burned low, shadows flickering across her face. On the table before her lay a pile of newspapers and magazines, each headline more cruel than the last. Unfit mother, mental breakdown, secret affair. Every word felt like another knife in her chest. Her hand pressed protectively against her belly. I'm sorry, she whispered to her unborn child, her voice breaking. I'm trying, but I don't know how much more I can take. The tears she had held back for days finally broke free. They fell hot and steady, dripping onto her hands, her sobs echoing softly in the empty room. She buried her face in her palms, surrendering to the pain she had tried so hard to contain. The door opened quietly. Marco stepped inside, his footsteps heavy against the marble floor. For a moment he didn't speak. He simply watched her, his face unreadable. But behind his dark eyes, something stirred, a flicker of recognition. "Elena," he said gently. She looked up, startled, her cheeks wet and blotched. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I'm not strong like you think. Adrian has the world believing I'm broken, and maybe he's right. Maybe I am." Marco crossed the room slowly, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. He crouched beside her chair, lowering himself until his eyes were level with hers. "You're not broken. You're surviving." Her chest shook with another sob. Surviving doesn't feel like living. It feels like drowning. For a long moment, Marco didn't answer. His gaze lingered on her trembling hands, the exhaustion carved into her face. Then, in a voice quieter than she'd ever heard from him, he said, "I know what drowning feels like." Elena blinked through her tears. "You?" He leaned back slightly, his eyes shifting toward the fire. "Years ago I had a brother, younger than me. He believed in the business, but he believed in people more. He trusted when he shouldn't have, and because of that, he was betrayed. Shot in the back by someone we thought was family." His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "I held him as he bled out, and in that moment, I realized something. Pain doesn't kill you, it hardens you, makes you sharper, but it never leaves. I've lived with that pain every day." Elena's tears slowed, her breath catching at the rawness in his tone. She had expected Marco De Luca, the untouchable mafia billionaire, to speak only in power and threats, not in grief. "What did you do?" she asked softly. Marco's eyes returned to hers, dark and unflinching. "I built walls so no one could ever get close enough to betray me again, and I destroyed anyone who tried." The silence between them stretched, heavy with truths unspoken. Elena reached for his hand before she realized what she was doing. Her fingers brushed his, tentative but real. "That sounds lonely," she whispered. For the first time, Marco didn't pull away. His hand remained, steady and warm. "It is." Elena's tears returned, but softer this time, less from despair and more from release. She leaned back against the chair, her body trembling with exhaustion. Marco stayed beside her, silent, an immovable presence in the storm of her pain. As the fire cracked, Elena whispered, almost to herself, "I don't want to be hardened. I just want to be whole again." Marco's grip tightened slightly around her hand. "Then, let me carry some of the weight. You don't have to do this alone anymore." Her eyes met his, searching for deception, but found none. For the first time in weeks, she felt something unfamiliar, comfort. And though Elena didn't know it yet, the moment she allowed herself to lean on Marco would mark the beginning of a bond neither of them could walk away from. The next morning, sunlight streamed into the estate's library, illuminating the scattered headlines that once haunted Elena. She stood in front of them now, no longer weeping, but studying them with sharpened eyes. The fire that Marco had seen flicker the night before was beginning to grow. Her reflection in the tall window surprised her. The fragile, broken woman from the gala seemed like a ghost fading into the past. In her place stood someone different, still bruised, still aching, but no longer willing to kneel. She pressed a hand against her belly. "I can't let him win," she whispered to her child. "Not for me, for you." The door opened softly, and Marco entered. He carried a folder, thick with papers, but paused when he saw her standing tall, her shoulders squared. For once, she didn't look like a guest lost in his world. She looked like someone ready to claim her place in it. "You didn't sleep," he observed. "No," Elena admitted. "But I'm done crying." Marco set the folder on the table, his eyes narrowing in curiosity. "What changed?" Elena turned to face him fully. "I realized something. Adrian has already taken everything from me, my dignity, my trust, my peace. If I let him, he'll take my child too, and I won't let that happen." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Marco gave the slightest nod, a flicker of respect crossing his features. "Good, because it's time you stopped being a victim." He opened the folder, spreading photographs and documents across the table. "These are Adrian's deals, fraudulent contracts, stolen funds, names of men he's betrayed. If you want to fight him, this is your weapon." Elena stared at the evidence, her stomach tightening. Once, the sight of such darkness would have sent her running, but now she felt her resolve harden. Then let's use it. Marco raised a brow. No hesitation? None, she said firmly. If he wants to paint me as weak, I'll show him just how wrong he is. Later that day, Marco's staff brought in a wardrobe. Elegant dresses, tailored suits, accessories fit for power. Elena hesitated as the maids urged her toward the mirror. I don't belong in clothes like this, she murmured. Yes, you do, Marco said from the doorway, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Image matters in this world. Adrian humiliated you in front of society. You'll answer him in the same arena. Hours later, when Elena finally stood in front of the mirror again, she barely recognized herself. The soft maternity gown was gone, replaced by a sleek black dress that hugged her figure with dignity, not shame. Her hair was pulled back elegantly, her eyes lined with determination. She turned to Marco, her voice steady. If we do this, we do it my way. I won't just be your pawn in a war against Adrian. I'll be the one to stand beside you, and against him. A rare smile ghosted across Marco's lips. Then welcome to the fight, Elena Rossi. That evening, as she walked through the estate halls, the guards and staff turned to watch her. She wasn't the broken woman Marco had carried in from the rain. She was someone different now. Someone dangerous to underestimate. Elena paused at the balcony, gazing out at the city lights in the distance. She could almost see Adrian's face, smug and untouchable. For the first time, the thought didn't make her crumble. It made her stronger. Because she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing to strike. The ballroom glittered under golden chandeliers, filled with the hum of champagne glasses clinking and violins playing a soft overture. New York's elite gathered in their finest gowns and tailored tuxedos, exchanging pleasantries that were more performance than sincerity. Tonight's charity gala was the kind of event Adrian Rossi thrived on. It was his stage, his sanctuary. But tonight, Adrian was not the only star. A hush rippled through the room as the doors opened. Marco De Luca entered first, his presence commanding silence without a word. Beside him walked Elena Rossi. No longer the trembling, humiliated wife the city remembered, but a woman transformed. She wore a midnight blue gown that flowed like water, every detail crafted to highlight her dignity rather than her shame. A diamond bracelet glimmered at her wrist, but it wasn't the jewelry that held the room's attention. It was her. The way she stood tall, shoulders back, eyes steady, no tears, no brokenness, only quiet strength. Gasps followed them as they descended the staircase. Murmurs rose like a tide. Is that Elena Rossi? With Marco De Luca? She looks incredible. Elena felt every eye, every whisper. Fear clawed at her chest, but Marco's steady presence beside her grounded her. He didn't touch her, didn't guide her. He didn't need to. His very existence was enough to shield her from the judgment that once cut her down. Across the ballroom, Adrian froze mid-conversation, his champagne flute slipping slightly in his grip. Sabrina, glittering in emerald silk, followed his gaze and stiffened. No, Adrian muttered under his breath. She wouldn't dare. But she had. Elena met his stare across the room. For the first time since the gala, she didn't look away. She held his gaze, calm, unflinching. Adrian's jaw tightened, his pride unraveling as the crowd turned from him to her. She's making you look weak, Sabrina whispered sharply, her nails digging into his arm. Adrian forced a smile, but his eyes burned with fury. We'll see how long she lasts. Meanwhile, Elena and Marco approached a group of investors, men who once looked down on her as nothing more than the quiet wife. Tonight they shifted nervously under her calm composure. Marco spoke little, letting Elena introduce herself. Mrs. Rossi. One of them stammered, "We didn't expect to see you here." Her smile was polite, but her words were steel. "No, I imagine you didn't. But I'm not hiding anymore." Marco watched from the corner of his eye, a flicker of satisfaction in his expression. She was proving herself, step by step. As the evening continued, Elena moved gracefully from conversation to conversation. Whispers followed her, but this time they weren't about weakness. They were about resilience. She wasn't the victim Adrian painted her to be. She was rewriting the narrative in real time. Toward the end of the night, Adrian finally confronted her. He caught her near the balcony, his smile sharp, his voice a hiss beneath the music. "You think this changes anything?" He sneered. "Parading around with De Luca? You're still nothing without me. Elena's chin lifted. If I'm nothing, why does it scare you so much to see me standing here? For a moment his mask slipped, revealing the rage beneath. He leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. Enjoy your moment, Elena, because when I'm finished, you won't have anything left. Before she could answer, Marco appeared at her side. His hand rested lightly on the railing, his presence enough to silence Adrian. Careful, Marco said calmly. You're speaking to a woman under my protection, and I don't take kindly to disrespect. Adrian's smile faltered. He stepped back, his eyes darting between them. For the first time, he looked uncertain. And as Adrian retreated into the crowd, Elena realized the balance of power had shifted. She was no longer the humiliated wife. She was the woman who dared to stand beside Marco De Luca. The gala was behind them, but its echoes lingered in Elena's mind. She had stood tall. She had faced Adrian, yet doubt still gnawed at her chest. Was this new strength real, or was she simply leaning on Marco's shadow? The following evening, Marco summoned her to his study. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a desk lamp and the flicker of the fireplace. Heavy shelves lined with leather-bound books surrounded them, the silence broken only by the quiet crackle of burning logs. Elena, Marco began, his voice even, there's something you need to see. She tensed immediately. Every time he said those words, the world she thought she knew unraveled further. Marco placed a file on the desk between them, his dark eyes locked onto hers. This is about Adrian, not the scandals, not the mistress, something bigger. Her breath caught as she opened the file. The first page showed a list of names, business partners, investors, politicians. Each one was connected by thin red lines leading back to Adrian Rossi. What is this? She whispered. Proof, Marco said, his tone hard. Your husband didn't just betray you. He betrayed people far more dangerous than you can imagine. He funneled money from criminal networks into his own accounts. And when they found out, he tried to double-cross them. Elena shook her head, disbelief clouding her thoughts. No, Adrian is greedy, but this? These people, these connections, they're dangerous. He wouldn't. Marco cut her off. He did. I know, because some of that money was mine. The words struck her like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. Yours? Marco leaned forward, his voice low and controlled. He used me. He came into my world pretending he could handle it. He took what didn't belong to him, lied about his loyalty, and thought he could walk away clean. Men like him don't last long. Elena's stomach twisted violently. Betrayal was one thing, but this was a death sentence. If that's true, then he's in danger. Marco's expression darkened. No, Elena, you are. Her eyes widened. Me? He humiliated you to weaken you. Now he's spreading lies to discredit you. And if the people he owes realize you're still tied to him, you and your child become leverage. Targets. Elena's knees nearly buckled. She pressed a hand to her belly, fear stabbing through her heart. I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose this world. Marco's voice softened just slightly. Neither did I once, but you can't run from it now. You survive by facing it. Tears blurred her vision as she looked at the file again. Numbers, transfers, offshore accounts, all proof that Adrian wasn't just a selfish husband, but a criminal who had placed her life in jeopardy. I thought losing him at the gala was the worst thing that could happen to me, she whispered. But I was wrong. I never really knew who he was. Marco stepped closer, his presence steady, grounding. Now you do, and you have a choice. You can keep pretending he's just a man who broke your heart, or you can see him for what he is and prepare for what's coming. Elena closed the file with shaking hands. Her tears were no longer just grief. They were fire, searing away the last illusions she had clung to. She lifted her chin, meeting Marco's gaze with a newfound resolve. Then we fight. For me, for my child, for the truth. For a rare moment, Marco allowed himself a thin smile. Good, because Adrian Rossi's empire is about to collapse, and you're going to help me bring it down. And in that dimly lit study, Elena realized her war wasn't just against betrayal. It was against the man she once called her husband. The boardroom of Rossi Enterprises was built to impress. Polished mahogany table, panoramic views of the city, walls lined with modern art. But today the air inside was thick with tension. Adrian Rossi strode in, confident as always, but he felt the unease before anyone spoke. The men and women around the table didn't rise to greet him. Their eyes were sharp, calculating, and for the first time, Adrian sensed control slipping through his fingers. "Let's get this over with," Adrian said smoothly, adjusting his cufflinks as he took his seat at the head of the table. "We have important deals to finalize." One of the senior board members cleared his throat. "Actually, Mr. Rossi, we have urgent concerns to address." Adrian's smile faltered. "Concerns?" The man slid a folder across the table. "Documents have surfaced, evidence of funds missing from joint ventures, offshore transfers under your name. Investors are demanding answers." Adrian's chest tightened. He forced a laugh. "Baseless rumors, smear tactics from competitors." But another voice cut in, sharp and skeptical. "Then how do you explain this?" A series of photographs spread across the table. Photos of Adrian meeting with known associates from Marco De Luca's world. Blurry, but damning. Adrian's jaw clenched. He hadn't realized how much Marco had gathered, how quickly it had been leaked. His carefully constructed mask cracked as murmurs spread around the room. "This is outrageous," he snapped. "I've led this company to success for years. You think some forged papers change that?" A female board member leaned forward, her eyes cold. "Your wife appeared at last night's gala with Marco De Luca himself. Do you realize what that means for our reputation? While you flaunted your mistress, your pregnant wife stood taller than you ever did. Investors are already questioning where their loyalties should lie." The words cut deeper than Adrian expected. Elena, his Elena, was no longer his weakness. She was becoming his rival. "I won't sit here and be lectured," Adrian barked, slamming his hand on the table. "This company exists because of me." But his fury only widened the cracks. By the time the meeting adjourned, whispers of a vote of no confidence were already circling. Adrian left the room with his pride intact on the surface, but inside, a storm was brewing. That afternoon, Elena sat with Marco in his study, the city skyline glowing behind them. Marco handed her a tablet, the news already buzzing with Adrian's humiliation. "Boardroom in chaos," the headline read. "Rossi empire shaken by financial scandal." Elena's breath caught as she scrolled. Photos of Adrian leaving the building, jaw tight, eyes furious, filled the screen. For the first time, the man who once towered over her looked small. "He's falling," she whispered. Marco's voice was calm, deliberate. "It's only the beginning. This is the first crack in his empire. Soon the whole thing will collapse." Elena stared at the image of Adrian, a swirl of emotions rising inside her. Satisfaction, sorrow, even pity. For years she had given him everything. Now, watching him unravel, she realized he had built his life on lies so fragile that the truth alone could destroy him. Her hand rested on her belly. "He'll come after me," she said softly. Marco met her gaze, unwavering. "Yes, which is why we strike first." The fire in his eyes both frightened and steadied her. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was part of the storm tearing Adrian's world apart. And as Elena watched her husband's first public downfall, she knew this was more than revenge, it was justice. And justice had only just begun. The storm outside mirrored the storm within Elena. She sat in the grand drawing room of Marco's estate, staring at the television as reporters dissected Adrian's downfall. Every word felt like a double-edged sword. Yes, Adrian was slipping, but the lies he spread about her still lingered. Headlines flashed across the screen. "Unstable wife hides in mafia billionaire's mansion." Her chest tightened. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with pressure. She pressed a trembling hand against her belly. "I can't breathe," she whispered. Marco entered just then, his sharp eyes immediately catching the pallor in her face. "Elena." She looked up at him, her vision swimming. "It's too much. I can't." Her voice broke, and she doubled over, a sharp pain cutting through her abdomen. Marco was at her side in an instant. His arm steadied her, his hand pressing against her back as her body trembled. "What's wrong?" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "The baby. Something's wrong." Fear, real, raw fear, flashed across Marco's face, a sight few had ever witnessed. He scooped her into his arms without hesitation, barking orders to his men. "Get the car, now!" The rain hammered down as the black sedan sped through the city streets, its tires hissing against the wet pavement. Inside, Elena clutched Marco's hand, her knuckles white. Every contraction, every bolt of pain tore through her with brutal force. "Stay with me," Marco urged, his voice unshakable even as his eyes betrayed the storm within. "Breathe. Do you hear me, Elena? Breathe." She gasped, her tears mixing with sweat. What if I lose the baby? What if? You won't, Marco said fiercely, his grip tightening. Not while I'm here. Do you understand? You are not alone anymore. The words anchored her, even as fear clawed at her chest. She clung to him, her breaths ragged but steadying under his command. At the hospital, doctors rushed her into a private suite. Marco refused to leave her side, his presence a shield against the chaos. He held her hand as monitors beeped, as nurses moved swiftly, as the doctor checked the baby's heartbeat. Finally, the steady rhythm filled the room. The sound was strong, alive. Elena sobbed in relief. The baby, it's okay? The doctor smiled gently. A scare, but the heartbeat is strong. Stress triggered the contractions, but with rest and care, both mother and child should be fine. Elena collapsed back against the pillows, her tears soaking the sheets. Marco remained at her side, his hand still wrapped around hers. For once, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence carried more than words, the silent vow that he would never let her face danger alone again. When the room finally quieted, Elena turned her head toward him. Her voice was barely a whisper. You were scared. Marco met her gaze, his mask lowered. Yes. The honesty startled her. Marco De Luca, the man who commanded empires, admitting fear. Why? She asked softly, his eyes darkened, his grip tightening around her hand. Because losing you, or that child, would have been the one thing I couldn't control, and I don't lose what I protect. Elena's heart ached, not from fear this time, but from something deeper, something dangerous. She realized then that Marco's protection wasn't just power, it was personal. And as she drifted into an exhausted sleep, Marco sat vigil by her bedside, knowing this was the moment his world began to change forever. The city skyline glittered with false peace, but inside Adrian Rossi's penthouse, chaos reigned. His office desk was buried under papers, phones ringing non-stop, messages piling in from lawyers, bankers, and board members. His empire was unraveling faster than he could contain it. Mr. Rossi, his attorney said over speakerphone, voice clipped with tension, the FBI has formally opened an investigation into your financial dealings. They've subpoenaed records from your overseas accounts. You need to prepare for. Adrian slammed his fist against the desk, sending pens clattering to the floor. No, they can't touch me. This is De Luca's doing. He's feeding them lies. But deep down, Adrian knew the truth. The evidence was too precise, too thorough. Someone had dug into his secrets and handed them neatly to the authorities. And only one man had both the motive and the reach to do it. Marco De Luca. Meanwhile, across the city, Marco stood at the head of a long oak table in his private war room. Screens lined the walls, each displaying streams of information. Financial records, news coverage, FBI bulletins. Around him, his most trusted men sat in silence, awaiting his word. Elena's safety comes first, Marco said firmly. No leaks trace back to her. This is my war with Adrian, not hers. His right-hand man nodded. The feds already have enough to bury him. Wire transfers, forged contracts, offshore laundering. It's all airtight. He won't crawl out of this one. Marco's gaze was steel. Good, but I want more. Public humiliation. He needs to lose everything before they lock him up. At the hospital, Elena was recovering, unaware of the storm tightening around her husband. She sat by the window, stroking her belly, when Marco entered quietly. She looked up, her eyes tired but steady. It's Adrian, isn't it? He's losing. Marco didn't deny it. He crossed the room, his presence filling the air. The FBI is closing in. He won't be able to hide much longer. Elena exhaled shakily. Part of me wants him to rot in prison. But part of me still remembers the man I married. I don't understand how I can feel both. Marco studied her for a long moment. His voice, when it came, was low and certain. Because you're human, but don't confuse memory with loyalty. He chose his path, now he has to walk it alone. Her throat tightened. She nodded, whispering, I just want this to end. Marco leaned closer, his eyes locking on hers. It will. But you need to be ready. When the truth comes out, you won't just be the woman he betrayed. You'll be the woman who stood tall when his empire collapsed. Elena felt a shiver run through her. His words were both promise and warning. Back in the penthouse, Adrian poured himself another drink, his hands unsteady. Sabrina paced like a caged cat, her patience thinning. You need to get ahead of this, she snapped. Fight back. Spin the story. Make Elena the villain again. Adrian's eyes burned with rage. It won't matter. The feds don't care about stories, they care about blood, and DeLuca has painted a target on my back. For the first time, Sabrina faltered. Fear crept into her perfect facade. Adrian, what if this is bigger than us? Adrian's hand tightened around his glass until it cracked. Then I'll burn DeLuca before he burns me. But across the city, Marco was already 10 steps ahead. His trap was set, his pieces in motion. And as the FBI closed in, Adrian Rossi didn't realize that his empire was collapsing not just from the outside, but from the inside, where Marco had already pulled the strings. The penthouse was no longer a sanctuary. Curtains were drawn tight, phones rang unanswered, and the once glittering rooms felt like cages. Adrian Rossi sat in the shadows, his tie loosened, a half-empty glass of scotch in his hand. Across from him Sabrina paced, her heels clicking against the marble, like a countdown to disaster. "You're unraveling," she snapped, her voice sharp as glass. "The board is against you, the FBI is circling, and the press has already declared you guilty." Adrian's glare cut into her. "Whose side are you on?" Sabrina froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Adrian to notice. His grip tightened around the glass. "You think I don't see it?" he growled. "The way you've been watching me, questioning me. Who are you really talking to, Sabrina?" She rolled her eyes, but the flicker of panic betrayed her. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm the only one still standing by you." But Adrian's paranoia was no longer blind. It was razor sharp. He lunged across the room, grabbing her wrist, forcing her phone from her hand. He scrolled through the messages, his breath quickening as he read. There it was. Conversations with an unknown number, updates about his meetings, his moods, his plans, and woven between them, a name he hated more than any other. DeLuca. Adrian's chest heaved. "You've been feeding him information." Sabrina yanked free, her voice rising. "I did it for us, don't you get it? Aligning with DeLuca was the only way to survive. You were losing, Adrian. I was protecting our future." "Our future?" His laugh was bitter, broken. "You never cared about us. You cared about yourself." Before Sabrina could respond, the penthouse doors burst open. Federal agents stormed inside, their shouts echoing through the marble halls. "FBI, don't move." Adrian spun, panic flashing across his face. Sabrina gasped, her mask of control shattering. Agents closed in, rifles raised, voices commanding. Adrian's glass shattered against the floor as they forced him to the ground, cold steel cuffs snapping around his wrists. "You set me up!" Adrian roared, twisting toward Sabrina as agents dragged him to his feet. "You betrayed me." But Sabrina wasn't spared. Another agent approached, holding out her phone wrapped in an evidence bag. "We've got enough here to tie her in. Conspiracy, obstruction, maybe more." Sabrina's blood drained from her face. "Wait, you don't understand. I was helping. I gave you everything." The agent's voice was flat. "And you'll explain it to a judge." As they cuffed her, Sabrina turned one last time toward Adrian. Her eyes were wild, desperate. "You promised me everything." Adrian spat back, his voice venom, "and you destroyed everything." They were shoved out separately, their shouts echoing down the hallway, two predators devoured by their own treachery. Across the city, Elena watched the breaking news from Marco's study. The television replayed the footage. Adrian Rossi, once the golden boy of the business world, dragged out in handcuffs. Beside him, Sabrina Cole, the mistress who thought she could outplay everyone, caught in her own snare. Elena pressed a hand to her chest. Relief washed over her, but so did something else. A deep, aching sorrow. Once Adrian had been her entire world. Now he was nothing but a headline. Marco stood behind her, silent, watching the screen with cold satisfaction. "The game is over," he said. Elena turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. "For them, maybe, but for me, this is just the beginning." Marco's gaze lingered on her, a flicker of respect in his dark eyes. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was rising. And as Adrian and Sabrina faced the ruin they created, Elena took her first true step into a future no betrayal could touch. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and urgency. Nurses moved swiftly, their sneakers squeaking against the polished floors, voices clipped and professional. But for Marco DeLuca, the world had narrowed to a single sound, the labored breaths of Elena Rossi. Her hand squeezed his with desperate strength as another contraction ripped through her. Her face was pale, sweat glistening on her forehead, strands of hair clinging to her damp skin. "Marco," she gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm here," he said firmly, his voice low but steady. "Look at me, Elena." You're not alone. Doctors guided her onto the delivery bed, monitors beeping, commands flying back and forth. Marco had faced gunfire, betrayal, and bloodshed without blinking, but this terrified him in a way nothing else ever had. Elena screamed as another contraction tore through her. Marco gripped her hand tighter, his own jaw clenched, his heart pounding against his ribs. "Breathe," he urged. "You've survived worse than this. You can do it." Her tears spilled, her voice breaking. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Marco cut in, his tone fierce. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. Stronger than me, stronger than Adrian, stronger than anyone. Don't you dare give up now." The room swirled with chaos, but Elena clung to his voice like an anchor. With each wave of pain, she found herself returning to the steady strength in his eyes. Hours stretched into an eternity. Marco never left her side. He held ice to her lips, wiped her forehead, whispered words only she could hear. For a man who commanded empires, this moment was stripped of power, of wealth, of fear. It was only raw humanity. Finally, the doctor's voice rose above the storm. "One last push, Elena. You're almost there." Her body trembled with exhaustion. She wanted to give up, to collapse, but Marco's hand tightened around hers, his voice breaking for the first time. "Please, Elena. For me, for your child. Don't stop now." His plea lit something deep within her. With a cry that tore from the depths of her soul, Elena pushed with everything she had left. And then, silence, broken by the sweetest sound she had ever heard. A baby's cry. Her sobs erupted instantly, tears of relief flooding her face. She collapsed back against the pillows, her chest heaving, her body trembling. "Is my baby?" The doctor smiled as a nurse placed the small swaddled bundle in her arms. "Healthy, strong, you have a beautiful daughter." Elena cradled the tiny life against her chest, her tears falling freely. The baby's cries softened as she nestled into her mother's warmth. Elena pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, whispering, "I've got you, my love. You're safe now." Marco stood frozen beside her, his chest tight, his vision blurring. He had seen death in all its forms, but life, this fragile, miraculous life, unraveled him completely. Elena looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. "Do you want to hold her?" For a moment, Marco didn't move. His hands that had signed deals with blood, trembled as he reached out. She placed the baby carefully into his arms. The child was impossibly small against his broad chest, her tiny fist curling around his finger. Marco's breath caught. He had never thought himself capable of tenderness, yet here he stood, holding something purer than anything in his world. His voice was barely a whisper. "She's perfect." Elena watched him, her heart swelling. In that moment, she saw the walls around Marco De Luca crack, not from power, but from love. And as the baby's cries faded into peaceful breaths, Marco knew his life would never be the same again. The hospital room was quiet now, the chaos of birth replaced by the soft hum of machines and the rhythmic breaths of a newborn child. Elena lay resting, her daughter nestled against her chest, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and pure serenity. Marco stood at the window, the city lights glittering beyond the glass. He had spent countless nights staring at this skyline, calculating his next move, building power in shadows. But tonight, the city felt different. Smaller, almost irrelevant. Behind him, Elena's voice was soft, barely more than a whisper. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Marco turned. Elena's eyes were open, glowing with the quiet strength of a mother. She stroked her daughter's tiny head, her fingers trembling with tenderness. "She is," Marco admitted. His voice carried a weight he hadn't intended, almost reverent. Elena looked at him closely, studying his face. "You've seen a lot of things, haven't you? Darkness, violence, power. But this." She nodded toward the baby. "This is different." He walked toward her slowly, his footsteps heavy with thought. "I've lived my life in shadows," he said. "Every choice I made was about survival, control, fear. But holding her earlier, for the first time in years, I felt something I didn't recognize." Elena's gaze softened. Hope. Marco stopped beside the bed, his eyes locked on the sleeping child. "Maybe," he whispered. "Or maybe weakness. In my world, love is a liability. But right now, I don't care." Silence settled over the room, broken only by the soft coo of the baby. Elena reached out, touching his hand gently. "You're not weak, Marco. You're changing. And maybe that's what scares you most." He exhaled slowly, the truth in her words piercing deeper than any bullet ever could. Later, when Elena drifted back to sleep, Marco remained by the window, his mind racing. His empire stretched across continents, casinos, shipping lines, alliances carved in blood. But all of it suddenly felt hollow compared to the fragile life in that hospital bed. His right-hand man, Luca, slipped into the room quietly. "Boss," he murmured, "everything's in motion. Adrian's finished. The feds have him locked down tight. He won't crawl out of this one. Marco didn't from the window. And the rest, your businesses are strong, no threats." Luca hesitated. "But there will always be more, Marco. Rivals, deals, enemies. That's the life we chose." Marco finally turned, his gaze hard. "No, that's the life I chose, and I'm choosing something else now." Luca frowned, startled. "What are you saying?" Marco's voice was calm, steady, but final. "I'm done. After this, no more expansions, no more wars. My child will not grow up in a world where blood buys loyalty. I'll protect what I built, but I won't drown in it anymore." Luca's eyes widened. "You'd walk away? After everything?" "I'm not walking away," Marco corrected. He glanced at the sleeping mother and child. "I'm walking towards something better." For a long moment, Luca said nothing. Then he nodded slowly, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "If anyone can pull it off, it's you." When he left, Marco returned to Elena's side. He reached down, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch uncharacteristically tender. "I built an empire of shadows," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "But you and this child, you've given me a reason to step into the light." And in that quiet hospital room, Marco De Luca, the man feared as a mafia king, took his first true step toward redemption. Weeks later, the world had moved on from gossip to judgment. Adrian Rossi, once a darling of high society, now stood in a federal courtroom in chains. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted his name, their voices sharp with accusation. Inside, the judge's gavel struck with finality. "Adrian Rossi, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy." The courtroom buzzed with gasps. Adrian's face twisted with rage, his pride shattered. He glanced around desperately, as though searching for someone to cling to, but there was no one left. Sabrina, his mistress turned traitor, had already cut a deal with prosecutors. She sat stone-faced, avoiding his gaze, her own sentence looming. Adrian's eyes finally landed on Elena, sitting quietly in the back with Marco at her side. For a moment, his arrogance returned. "You did this," he spat, his voice carrying across the courtroom. Elena met his glare calmly. Her voice was steady, stronger than it had ever been. "No, Adrian, you did this to yourself." His fury collapsed into silence as the guards dragged him away, his footsteps echoing like the final toll of a bell. Outside the courthouse, flashes of cameras greeted Elena, but the narrative had shifted. No longer was she the humiliated wife, no longer the unstable woman painted by tabloids. Today she was the survivor, the mother, the woman who had stood against betrayal and refused to break. Marco shielded her from the chaos, his hand steady at her back as they walked through the crowd. Whispers followed them, but this time they carried respect. "She's stronger than I thought. She didn't just survive, she won." And De Luca, maybe he's not the monster they say. Elena held her head high, her daughter safe in her arms. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of shame lift from her shoulders. That evening, back at Marco's estate, peace replaced chaos. The baby slept soundly in a cradle near the fireplace, her tiny breaths soft and steady. Elena sat curled in a chair, watching the flames dance. Marco approached, a glass of wine in his hand, though he set it aside untouched. He stood before her, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "It's over," he said quietly. Elena nodded, her eyes on the child. "For Adrian, maybe. For me, it's just beginning." Marco crouched beside her, his hand brushing against the cradle. "I've spent my life building walls, Elena, but you tore them down without even trying, and now, for the first time, I don't want to rebuild them." Her throat tightened. "Marco." He took her hand gently, his voice raw. "I can't promise I'll ever escape the shadows completely, but I can promise you this. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you and our child never feel fear again." Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. She squeezed his hand, her voice breaking. "That's all I ever wanted. Safety, family, a chance to live without looking over my shoulder." Marco leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers, his breath warm, his words a vow. "Then that's what you'll have. From now on, Elena, you're not just surviving, you're living. With me." The baby stirred, letting out a soft cry. Alina lifted her daughter into her arms, rocking her gently. Marco watched, his chest tightening with a feeling he once thought impossible: peace. Outside, the storm that had haunted them for so long had finally passed. And in that quiet moment, Alina knew she had found not just justice, but love. A love born from betrayal, forged in fire, and strong enough to carry them into a new life together. So that's how the story comes to an end. My dear friends, if you're still here with me right now, it means something in this journey has touched your heart in a special way. Maybe it's Elena's courage, maybe Marco's transformation, or maybe it's the reminder that even in our darkest moments, we can choose to rise. The Stoics used to say, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. How often do we let fear and betrayal break us long before life actually does? Yet, like Alina, we can find strength in pain, and like Marco, we can choose to step out of the shadows when love gives us a reason. Life will test us, but as Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. So maybe today, this story reminds us all, healing is possible, dignity can be reclaimed, and no betrayal can define us if we refuse to stay broken. If this touched you, share it with someone who needs strength today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us, because together, we'll keep telling stories that remind us we're stronger than we think.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our channel. In today's heartwarming tale, you'll witness the astonishing turn of events when our heroine marries a supposedly struggling man, only to discover he's a hidden millionaire. By the end of the story, you'll see the most remarkable moment of all, a surprise revelation that completely changes her life and brings unexpected joy to their future family. Want to know exactly how they end up turning heartbreak into lasting happiness? Make sure to listen or read the entire story to uncover every twist and turn. If you enjoy stories about resilience, love, and life-changing secrets, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more incredible stories that inspire and uplift. We'd love to hear your personal opinions, so leave a comment below and tell us your thoughts. Also, let us know where you're tuning in from. We can't wait to connect with each and every one of you. Serena Moretti had always envisioned her engagement party as a dazzling affair: elegant floral arrangements, shimmering chandeliers, and an air of sophistication wafting through a luxurious hotel ballroom. Growing up under the watchful eyes of a wealthy family, she had been taught that appearances were everything, and her long-awaited celebration at the luxurious Belrose Hotel seemed poised to exceed all expectations. The soft glow of candlelit centerpieces cast flickering shapes on the parquet floor, while servers in crisp uniforms glided by with polished trays of champagne flutes. With each sparkle reflected in the tall mirrors lining the walls, Serena imagined her future laid out flawlessly. She would marry Derek Knight, the rising star of New York's business scene, and secure both her family's pride and her own place in high society. Standing at the center of that grand ballroom, Serena smoothed the silk folds of her pale lavender gown, still unable to shake the slight flutter of nerves dancing in her stomach. She glanced around, searching for Derek in the swirl of guests. They were people she had grown up with, silver-haired moguls discussing their acquisitions, socialites discreetly comparing the size of the jewels on their necks, and influential politicians forging silent alliances over glasses of bubbling champagne. Serena's parents, Richard and Helene Moretti, presided like regal monarchs over smaller clusters of acquaintances, greeting each one with polite smiles that never reached their eyes. For months, they had stressed that Derek was the ideal match for her, a well-bred, ambitious partner who possessed just the right balance of business, savvy, charm, and clout to maintain the Moretti legacy. Serena believed she had found love in him, a man who complemented her grace and spirit even if he was sometimes distant. Yet something in her gut told her that Derek's tardiness tonight meant more than just a busy schedule. In their years of courting, he had usually arrived precisely on time, an orchestrated show of punctuality that made a good impression on Serena's parents. But the minutes dragged on, and hushed murmurs from the corners of the ballroom turned to speculation. Serena caught her mother's warning gaze from across the room. Helene, clad in a sophisticated violet gown with embroidered lace, offered a tight-lipped smile that did not hide her impatience. When the lavish gilded doors finally swung open, the hush that fell over the crowd made the delicate strains of a nearby violin audible for a split second. Eyes shifted in Derek's direction, or rather, the direction of Derek and another woman. He appeared unmistakably smug in his tailored suit, entering arm in arm with Lillian Hayworth. Lillian's presence ripped a collective gasp from the guests. She was striking in her scarlet dress, which hugged every curve, her lofty heels clicking decisively on the marble. A hush settled over the room as Derek guided Lillian forward, ignoring the stunned expressions around them. The faint tinkling of glass against silver cutlery ceased. Every nerve in Serena's body tingled with disbelief as the man she was supposed to marry approached, stopping just inches from where she stood, and spoke the words that would unravel her world in an instant. Kamekamu. Paragraph 2, approx. 500 words. Serena's breath caught in her throat, her heart thumping so loudly it seemed to echo off the polished floors. She expected Derek to apologize, to say he was late because of some urgent business phone call, to reassure her of his devotion. Instead, his ice-cold stare stripped her of any composure she might have mustered. The hush of the ballroom seemed amplified, each pair of glittering eyes pinned on them, waiting for drama to unfold. Lillian offered a saccharine smile, not the slightest bit ashamed to stand there clutching Derek's arm, as though parading her spoils before an audience of onlookers. "I'm calling off the engagement," Derek said, the clipped tone of his voice as chilling as the air-conditioned draft snaking through the room. A faint clink resonated as a waiter, mid-pour, allowed champagne to overflow onto a pristine white tablecloth. The magnitude of his words hit Serena like a punch in the gut, and her mind momentarily went blank. How could he do this here, with her family, friends, and an array of high-profile guests watching? She managed to whisper, "What do you mean you're calling it off?" Yet the question was an echo of confusion rather than a challenge. Every nerve within her trembled with shock, anger, and an odd sense of betrayal. How could the man who had proposed so ardently now show up with someone else by his side? Derek leveled a cold gaze at her. "I never truly loved you, Serena," he declared, his confidence unwavering. At this, Lillian let out a soft, provocative giggle, leaning into him with a theatrical tilt of her head. "I needed the social leverage your family could provide, but I found a better opportunity," Derek continued, each word slicing deeper. "You just don't have what I need anymore." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd, and Serena felt the scalding heat of shame flooding her cheeks. She could practically hear her parents' fury, yet she clung to a thread of dignity as she searched Derek's face for a flicker of remorse or second thoughts. She found none. His polished shoes remained planted on the floor, his expression stony, unyielding. As if to solidify the blow, Lillian ran her fingers along his lapel and purred, "You poor thing, Serena. Some people just aren't cut out for this world." Serena's pulse throbbed in her ears. This public humiliation was worse than any nightmare she could have conjured. She spotted a handful of journalists present, likely there to document the lavish engagement. Now, they were capturing the collapse of her life in real time. Cameras flashed once, twice, capturing the painful tableau of betrayal. In the corner of her vision, Serena could see her mother approach. She wanted to fold into her mother's arms, to be comforted. But Helene Moretti's face wasn't compassionate, it was stony with disappointment. For years, she had drilled into Serena the importance of marrying well, of strengthening the family's connections and ensuring a comfortable future. Derek's betrayal wasn't just a personal wound. It was a public shame that ricocheted back onto the entire Moretti name. "What have you done?" her mother hissed, not at Derek, but at Serena. The indignation in Helene's voice stung more fiercely than any blow could have. "You can't even secure an engagement properly. You've brought disgrace on us all. We told you how crucial this was." Serena's lips parted, but words failed to surface. Derek merely turned to lead Lillian away, ignoring the havoc he had unleashed, leaving Serena alone in a whirlpool of doubt, guilt, and heartbreak. Paragraph 3, approx. 500 words. Hours later, Serena stumbled along a rain-soaked Manhattan street with mascara smudged beneath her eyes, her feet throbbing in heels designed for ballrooms, not uneven sidewalks. Gone were the bright lights and the melodic clinking of champagne glasses. Instead, she found herself adrift in her own thoughts, each one darker and more crushing than the last. Her phone buzzed persistently, a barrage of messages from friends, inquisitive acquaintances, and likely a few reporters hungry for a scandalous quote. She silenced it, shoving the device into her tiny purse. None of them mattered anymore. She had no desire to spin a PR-friendly story or rush home to the Moretti penthouse, where she'd face her parents' unspoken condemnation. The memory of Derek's betrayal still twisted her gut. She could recall the glint in his eyes as he confirmed that their engagement was nothing more than a stepping stone. The fact that he'd come with Lillian made it feel personal, an orchestrated humiliation meant to show that he was trading up for something he deemed better. Reeling, she slipped into a small bar nestled on a side street, one she had never noticed before. A flickering neon sign above the door cast faint tinted light onto the wet pavement, as though trying and failing to be welcoming. Inside, the smell of stale beer mingled with cheap perfume and the low hum of conversation. This was a far cry from the refined lounges she usually frequented, but at least no one here recognized her. She settled onto a cracked vinyl stool, ordering a whiskey neat from an uninterested bartender who wordlessly obliged, sliding her a tumbler of the amber liquid. Serena winced at the first sip. She wasn't used to the sharp burn of strong spirits. All her life, she'd sipped fine wines and expensive champagnes. Yet tonight, she wanted something that stung, something that matched the raw ache in her chest. Lost in her own sorrow, she barely noticed the man who sat a few seats away, quietly observing her. He looked out of place in his simple worn jacket and faded jeans. No flashy watches or polished shoes to declare wealth or status. There was an air of calm about him, as if he were at ease wherever he went. Eventually, he slid over and rested an elbow on the bar, studying her tear-streaked face. "Tough night?" he asked. His voice was low, warm enough to disrupt the chill inside her. She glanced at him, noting his tousled dark hair and an intensity in his eyes she couldn't quite define. Under normal circumstances, she might have brushed off such an inquiry with a dismissive wave, but heartbreak has a way of stripping away one's usual defenses. "You could say that," she replied, gulping another mouthful of whiskey. The bitterness was oddly reassuring. At least it was a pain she could identify and control. Before long, she found herself sharing more than she ever intended. She spoke about the canceled engagement, Derek's brazen entrance with Lillian, and her parents' harsh reaction. The words tumbled out in a confession of heartbreak and humiliation. The man listened with a patience she had rarely witnessed, nodding occasionally, letting her speak without interruption. When she finally paused to catch her breath, tears glittering at the corners of her eyes, he reached out and gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. There was no pity in his look, just an odd sense of understanding, as though he too had been on the receiving end of life's unexpected jolts. "Sometimes," he said, "you discover who truly cares when everything falls apart." His gaze held hers, steady and sure, and something about it soothed the chaos swirling in her chest. Leaning back, he offered a gentle smile. "My name's Lucas King. If you need a random stranger to talk to, I'm here." Paragraph 4, approx of 500 words. Serena and Lucas spent the next hour or so trading fragments of their life stories over the scratched wooden bar counter. She told him about growing up in a privileged world where expectations weighed heavily on her, about the countless social gatherings that defined her youth, and how her parents' sole focus was forging alliances that would preserve the Moretti Empire. Lucas was a stark contrast, revealing that he drifted through life mostly on odd jobs and spontaneous decisions. He had no fancy degrees, no elaborate inheritance, nothing that tethered him to the demands of high society. He seemed content with an existence guided by day-to-day adventures in the pursuit of small joys. The more they spoke, the more Serena felt as though a heavy stone were being lifted from her spirit. Despite her heartbreak and shock, there was a comforting normalcy in talking to a stranger who had no hidden agenda. No demands for wealth or status. She clung to that feeling like a lifeline. Eventually, fueled by the combined effect of whiskey and the rawness of her emotions, she exhaled a trembling breath and said, "You know, I guess I'm not marriage material after all." "Is that so?" Lucas teased gently. There was a twinkle in his eyes, one that suggested he didn't believe her self-pity. "Well, if you ever decide you want a husband, I'm available. I'm no business mogul, but at least I listen." Serena's lips curved into a wry smile. It was absurd how quickly this conversation had turned. "Are you proposing?" she asked, mustering a playful tone. Inside, her heart hammered, torn between disbelief and a strange, almost desperate curiosity. She was vulnerable. Her dreams of a fairy tale engagement had just been shattered in front of hundreds of gawking witnesses. Lucas shrugged, as though this were the most normal proposition in the world. "Maybe I am. Life's short. Why spend it with people who don't appreciate you? You deserve someone who shows up and stays." He reached for his glass and clinked it gently against hers. "Even if it's someone you just met in a dingy bar." Had she been sober, Serena might have laughed outright or politely excused herself, but she wasn't. And her heart, battered and bruised, yearned for an escape from the unrelenting reality she had faced just hours ago. It felt rebellious and liberating to toy with the idea of marrying a stranger, if only to show her parents and Derek that her life belonged to her, that she could make her own choices without their meddling. Her head spun with possibilities as if a door to an entirely different future had abruptly swung open. Without letting reason intervene, Serena leaned in. "Okay," she said, her voice quivering. It sounded unreal, as though another person was speaking through her. "Marry me, Lucas King." She half expected him to laugh it off or claim he was just joking, but Lucas smiled, that gentle curve of his lips making her chest tighten with cautious hope. "It would be my honor," he replied, as though he were asking for nothing more important than a dance. And then he lifted his glass in a solemn toast, the overhead neon lighting reflecting off the whiskey, turning it molten gold. Serena pressed her glass to his, her heart pounding with reckless abandon. And in that fleeting moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this radical decision could lead her to a happier life than the one she'd abandoned tonight. Paragraph 5, approx 550 words. Serena woke up the next morning with a splitting headache that felt as though miniature construction crews were drilling behind her eyes. The room was unfamiliar, a cramped studio apartment with thinning paint on the walls and a single window overlooking a bustling street below. The worn beige couch she had been sleeping on creaked as she sat up. Confusion swarmed her thoughts like a gathering storm. Why was she here? What had she done last night? Then she glimpsed the cheap, silver-colored ring hugging the base of her left ring finger. The realization dawned on her with blinding intensity. She had actually married Lucas King. She closed her eyes, straining to recall each detail of the whirlwind. She remembered a dingy bar, the burning taste of whiskey, Lucas's steady gaze, and her own voice, blurred by heartbreak, saying, "Marry me." It all came back in disjointed flashes, culminating with a rushed visit to an all-night marriage bureau, where they'd exchanged vows in front of a weary clerk who barely looked up from his paperwork. A wave of dizziness washed over her. The gravity of her impulsive action now loomed large. A clattering noise from a tiny kitchen nook stirred her, and her gaze found Lucas standing in front of a battered stove, fiddling with a frying pan. He was barefoot, dressed in wrinkled sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, flipping scrambled eggs with surprising dexterity. For a fleeting moment, Serena watched him as though she were peeking into someone else's life. A domestic moment so at odds with the grand society events she was accustomed to. When Lucas glanced over his shoulder, he caught her wide-eyed stare and offered a lopsided grin. "Morning," he said, as if everything was utterly normal. "I'd ask if you slept well, but something tells me you might not have." Serena managed a dry laugh. "That would be accurate." She rose, massaging her temples, and hovered near the tiny table that doubled as a dining area. "So, we really did it? Got married?" She glanced at the ring, a flimsy, mass-produced band, and tried to quell the panic rising in her chest. How would she explain this to her parents if they even wanted to speak to her? How would she explain it to anyone? Lucas slid 2 plates onto the table, each bearing a modest helping of scrambled eggs and toast. "Looks that way," he replied, unruffled. "But hey, if you're having second thoughts, you're not obligated to stay. We can figure out the paperwork and end it if that's what you want." She listened to the sincerity in his tone and the complete absence of manipulation. She had spent years around people with meticulously curated images, individuals who use sweet words to hide motives like greed or status-seeking. Yet here was Lucas, the stranger-turned-husband, offering her an immediate way out. The thought struck her that he might be the single most genuine person she had encountered in a very long time. Serena slumped into a rickety chair, picking at the eggs. "I don't regret it," she said carefully, surprising herself with the admission. "Not exactly. It's just, everything is a mess." She swept a hand through her hair, recalling how her mother had turned her back, calling her a disgrace, how Derek had humiliated her in front of everyone she knew, how empty her life suddenly felt without the old scaffolding of wealth and acceptance. "I just need to figure out what comes next." Lucas nodded quietly and took a bite of his food. Though they sat in a threadbare apartment that lacked the comfort and luxury she had always taken for granted, Serena felt, for the first time in a while, an inexplicable sense of calm. Like this battered table, these cheap plates, and the warmth emanating from Lucas's simple presence might be the start of something that actually mattered. Paragraph 6, approx 550 words. Over the following weeks, Serena's new life took shape in a manner that was at once humbling and strangely liberating. Gone were the plush carpets, the silent housekeepers, and the refined cuisine of her parents' estate. In their place, she found the hum of a dated refrigerator, the clanging of neighbors' pipes, and the surprising delight of cooking simple meals together with Lucas in the cramped kitchenette. At first, every small inconvenience grated on her nerves. She missed having a staff to do her laundry or prepare her favorite dishes on demand. Yet as she adjusted, she realized how little she had actually engaged with reality before. Lucas, for his part, was an enigma. While he maintained a steady job working as a part-time mechanic, he seemed to possess far more knowledge than one might expect from someone living paycheck to paycheck. He spoke casually about topics like artisan wine tasting and the complexities of the global real estate market as though these were passing interests. When she challenged him on it, he'd merely shrug and say he liked to read. She noticed, too, that he never complained about money, even when they were scrounging for discounted groceries or skipping luxuries. If anything, Lucas appeared oddly content, as though living modestly was a deliberate choice rather than a forced circumstance. One weekend, Serena found herself rummaging through a cluttered closet to find an extra blanket, only to stumble on a small locked wooden box. She rarely intruded on Lucas's privacy, but curiosity got the better of her. Despite her own better judgment, she tested the lid, discovering it was not firmly locked. With a gentle click, it opened to reveal a neat stack of cash, thousands of dollars in banded notes. Her pulse quickened. Why would Lucas hide this when they were essentially living on ramen and cheap coffee? She quickly closed the box, confusion swirling in her head. For a brief, stomach-turning moment, she worried that he might be involved in something illegal. She had grown up in a world where even the smallest public misstep could erupt into scandal. Marrying a stranger was already risky enough. What if he was part of something that could destroy her life? The possibility gnawed at her. Yet as soon as she caught sight of Lucas bustling about the kitchenette, humming a tune, she felt doubt evaporate. He never displayed secrecy or paranoia, and there was a steadfast kindness in him that made it hard to believe he was a criminal. Then came the newspapers. Serena was rummaging for a notepad one evening when she discovered an old folder in the same closet containing a half-dozen clipped articles about corporate takeovers, philanthropic ventures, and technology startups. One particular photograph in a business section made her jaw drop. The face looked eerily like Lucas, though with a sharper haircut and a tailored suit. The name underneath wasn't Lucas King, however. It read, Lucas Alexander Sinclair, heir to the Sinclair fortune mysteriously missing. Her hands trembled as she skimmed the text. The article detailed a wealthy family at the helm of a sprawling empire that encompassed real estate holdings, advanced tech industries, and charitable foundations. And their heir, Lucas Alexander Sinclair, had vanished without explanation 3 years prior. Serena's heart hammered in her chest. Was her husband, the man fixing bikes, rummaging for coin change, and living in a rundown apartment, truly a member of one of the nation's richest families? Paragraph 7, approximately 550 words. Serena confronted Lucas that very night, her voice shaking as she held up the old photograph. The resemblance was undeniable. The same unruly dark hair, though neater in the photo, the same determined jawline, and the same deep-set eyes that always seemed to be quietly assessing the world. Lucas, or rather, Lucas Sinclair, stood there under the single bare light bulb in their tiny living room, his expression calm yet tinged with regret. "So it's true?" Serena's voice cracked with a mixture of betrayal and incredulity. "You're Lucas Alexander Sinclair, heir to Sinclair Enterprises, and you've been living like you have no resources at all. Why?" Lucas sighed and ran a hand through his hair, clearly debating how much to reveal. "Because I got tired," he said quietly, "of people seeing me as a walking checkbook. I wanted to know if I could stand on my own, if I could connect with people who weren't after my name." He paused, eyes darting to the worn-out couch, as though recalling countless sleepless nights. "I left everything behind, changed my name legally to King, gave up the trust fund, and decided to see how the other half lives. But this is huge, Lucas. And you lied to me. I thought—" Serena couldn't finish the thought. She recalled the times they had scraped by for bus fare, how she had learned to choose groceries based on price rather than brand labels, and how she had, in her darkest hour, believed she had married someone who had nothing. Yet there was a part of her that felt oddly relieved. Lucas wasn't a criminal. He was a runaway billionaire. "It wasn't my intention to deceive you," he said, stepping forward to clasp her trembling hands. "When we met, you were brokenhearted, and the last thing I wanted was to throw my wealth in your face, especially after seeing what you'd gone through with Derek. You told me how you were always measured by how well you married, how your parents only cared about social standing. I couldn't bear to be just another puzzle piece in someone else's plan for a perfect image." Serena bit her lower lip, struggling to control the flood of emotions. On one hand, she understood exactly what he meant. She had been suffocating her entire life under the burden of her parents' ambitions. On the other hand, he had withheld a monumental truth, allowing her to believe he was poor while a fortune lingered, unmentioned, just out of reach. She felt a mix of hurt, gratitude, confusion, and, most surprising, admiration. "Why not just tell me once we got married?" she demanded softly, pulling her hands free. After all, it wasn't a minor omission. Lucas's gaze wavered, sincerity spilling from his eyes. "I guess I got used to my new life, and a part of me was afraid you'd treat me differently once you knew. Your acceptance of me, of who I was pretending to be, was the first time I felt genuinely seen, not for how many zeros might be in my bank account, but for my personality, for my jokes, my flaws, and my simple existence." Tears welled in Serena's eyes. She wanted to be furious, but she found herself deeply touched by his reasoning. Love rarely made sense, and in their case, it had been fueled by heartbreak, spontaneity, and secrets. But it was real. Slowly she nodded, letting out a shaky breath. "All right," she said, "but this changes things. We can't keep pretending." She was interrupted by a shrill ring. Her phone vibrated on the coffee table, displaying her former fiancé's name, Derek. She hesitated, realizing with a sinking feeling that the ghosts of her past were not done with her quite yet. Paragraph 8, approximately 650 words. Serena hesitated, her gaze flickering between the phone and Lucas. Even with the revelation of his true identity pulsing through her thoughts, she felt a renewed sense of resolve surge up from within. She clicked the phone to speaker mode, letting Derek's voice cut through the uneasy quiet in their tiny living room. He spoke with that same self-satisfied tone that once made her cringe at high society galas. "Serena," he began, "I heard rumors you married someone else. Quite the hasty rebound, hmm?" She inhaled, steeling her nerves. "It's not a rumor, Derek. I'm married, and I'm happier than I ever was with you." Next to her, she sensed Lucas stiffen, but he stayed silent, offering her the chance to stand up for herself. Derek let out a low chuckle. "Glad you could find someone who'd take you in after that messy night. Lillian and I have been hearing a lot of interesting chatter around town. Seems you're not in the best financial shape these days. Who is this new husband of yours anyway? Another starry-eyed dreamer?" Serena's cheeks flamed with outrage. Part of her wanted to shout the truth about Lucas's wealth just to shut Derek up, but she reined herself in. "My finances are none of your concern," she stated firmly, "and if you called to mock me, I have better things to do." "Actually," Derek said, voice dripping with sarcasm, I called because I'm about to close a major deal, and I heard it might cross paths with your new fling. I'm extending a courtesy. If you want to avoid any unpleasant overlap, you should remember how these circles work. People talk, Serena, especially about spontaneous marriages that look suspicious. Serena's grip on the phone tightened. Don't threaten me, Derek. He laughed again, a hollow sound. Considerate advice. Goodbye, Serena. Surdi. With that, the line went dead, leaving a static hush in the apartment. The tension in the air felt tangible, like a coiled spring ready to snap. Serena stared at the phone, pulses of anger radiating through her. She had once been fearful of Derek's influence and wealth, but knowing Lucas was not just capable, but also quietly powerful in his own right, made her realize the tables had turned. Lucas offered her a soft look of understanding. I don't want you dealing with any more of his toxic meddling, he said quietly. We can put a stop to this. His eyes flicked toward the old articles, to the mention of Sinclair Enterprises, and she realized how unstoppable he could be if he chose to reclaim his inheritance and position. Over the following days, Serena and Lucas decided together that the time for living in secrecy was over. She had spent too long cowering under her family's rules and Derek's manipulations. Lucas, too, was weary of the double life he had maintained. Step by step, they began revealing the truth. At first, it was just a few friends. Then Lucas reconnected with his older cousin, Marianne Sinclair, one of the few relatives he still trusted. She confessed that the Sinclair family had feared the worst when he disappeared, imagining kidnappings or foul play. Yet she wasn't surprised to learn he had grown disillusioned with endless philanthropic galas and carefully orchestrated corporate events. You had such a big heart, Lucas, Marianne said warmly when they met at a modest coffee shop. It wasn't exactly shocking that you needed to break free. She glanced at Serena approvingly, seeing how this marriage, unconventional as it might have been, had given Lucas the happiness he once lacked. A flicker of relief shone in her eyes as though she believed Serena's presence was a positive change. Soon after, word spread that Lucas King was actually Lucas Sinclair, and the news garnered a whirlwind of attention from tabloids and business reporters. Serena found her phone buzzing with calls, from acquaintances who wanted juicy details, from ex-friends who had dismissed her after Derek's betrayal, and from reporters fishing for interviews. Paparazzi lingered outside their apartment building, hoping for a snapshot of the mysterious heir who had chosen a humble life. In the midst of the chaos, Serena clung to one certainty: their love was no longer a secret, and she refused to apologize for it. She might have lost her privileged standing in the Moretti family, but she had gained a partner who understood her, secrets and all. Whether or not Derek Knight or even her own disapproving parents approved of her new life no longer mattered. She had chosen Lucas, and in that choice, she had reclaimed her sense of self. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, where fate led our heroine to make an impulsive decision that ultimately became the best choice of her life. In the wake of shattered engagements and unexpected proposals, she found genuine love in a partner who valued her for who she truly was. Their bond proved stronger than any deceit or hidden fortune, reminding us that trust, kindness, and hope can transform even the darkest moments into a promising future. If you've reached this point, we hope the story has touched you as much as it touched us. Feel free to share your reflections in the comments and let us know if you've ever experienced a twist of fate in your own life. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales that speak to the heart. And if you know friends or family who love this kind of storytelling, invite them to tune in too.